Hello, welcome to this webinar. I'm Emil and I will introduce you to the presenter and the topic today. Today we have Gill Cleeren, one of our usual guests. I think this is at least the third webinar. Today he will present one very interesting topic about going to the cloud or switching on the clouds for Silverlight. The presentation will take approximately 1 hour and we will have a 15 minutes Q&A session. During Gill's talk, please send your questions in the chat console and Gill will try to answer the questions at the end of his presentation. Okay, so Gill.
Yeah, thank you, Emil. Hello everyone, good evening, good morning, or what else can I say, and welcome to this webinar, and it's titled this time Switching on the Cloud for Silverlight. So in this webinar that we organized with Silverlight Show and the people have completed, thanks for that by the way, I'm going to talk about moving Silverlight applications to the cloud. What is possible, what are the options that we have to actually use the cloud in a Silverlight scenario. So as Emil already said, it's going to take about 60 minutes and we'll have a Q&A afterwards. So let's get straight to it. So my name, let me introduce myself first, very quickly. So my name is Gill Cleeren. I'm a Microsoft Regional Director and an MVP, and I work for a company called Ordina in Belgium, where I mostly focus on Silverlight development and WPF and ASP.NET. I'm a regular speaker, also for the Silverlight Show webinars. I think it's my fourth, if I'm not mistaken. Could be the third, could be fourth, I'm not really sure. And I've also used a group in Belgium. I've written a book. And more importantly for you is that you can download the slides and the demos, I think on the Silverlight Show website as well, but you can download them from my blog as well, and that is down there at the bottom. It's snowball.be. You can send me a mail if you have any questions afterwards as well. You can follow me on Twitter. I mostly talk about Silverlight stuff, and that's at Gill Cleeren. Let's take a look at what we are going to be talking about. So I noticed in my daily job that many people know about Azure, or I should actually say Azure. Many people know about Azure, but many people don't really know what are the parts of Azure and what it's really all about. So that's why I decided to do like a small 10-minute introduction on Windows Azure. What are the parts of it? Which part can be interesting for you as a Silverlight developer? And then what do you need to start developing for Windows Azure? So those are the things that we'll be talking about in the first 10 minutes. Then, of course, the main part of this talk will be about moving Silverlight applications to the cloud. And so what I did is I actually will move an existing application to the cloud, and we'll take a look at the different steps, and you'll see that the cloud, the Windows Azure cloud, doesn't require you to go all in, as we say, and you can see which parts actually you want to move to the cloud. So we'll first take a look at how we can move the database. We'll take a look at how we can move, for example, WCF service or a REST service. What if we want to move the entire Silverlight application, so and the hosting website and the ZAP file and so on and so forth. I'll also be stopping and taking a look at how you can move a RIA Services application, because that requires a few differences in how you migrate your application, and as an application of that, we'll also use Azure as an intermediate layer for a Twitter application in Silverlight. That's the first slide of the agenda, and the second slide is about moving or using the blob storage. Blob storage is a second part of Azure that I want to use inside of my Silverlight applications. We can move existing we can move files in blob storage, and we can access them from Silverlight. I'm going to show you how. And you can also host the Silverlight ZAP inside of blob storage. And if we have time, we'll take a look at the optional part that I have at the end, and that's about Windows Phone and Azure and how these two platforms can work together. So we'll take a look at how we can access a service in the cloud. So I hope you enjoyed. By the way, some small practical stuff. So I think Emil already mentioned the fact that you can ask questions in the Q&A window in the webinar software, and you will be able to see a video recording of this webinar. It's being recorded, and the link of this will be sent to you afterwards, so you can take a look at it afterwards if you have any questions on the content of today. All right. With that out of the way, let's quickly take a look at what exactly Windows Azure is. Now, Windows Azure is actually a cloud platform. I think cloud is probably, it's a really hot topic, and I think everyone more or less has an understanding of what a cloud platform is. Basically, the cloud is a vast, an enormous amount of available resources for you to use inside of your for your applications. Assume that you have a new application and you want to host it somewhere. You don't have to go out, buy servers, set them up, install software on there. You just take a small part of the cloud to work to host your applications on. And if there is a spike, if there is an enormous increase suddenly in the traffic to your application, you add some more resources. If the traffic goes down, you simply let go of those resources, and they actually will be taken back into the cloud without you having to buy new servers and so on and so forth. And actually, Windows Azure is an application of that cloud platform, and it's Microsoft's implementation of the cloud platform. So Windows Azure is, as we say, an operating system for the cloud. It's the operating system that manages the cloud, the Microsoft cloud. It's an internet scale. The resources that are behind Windows Azure are enormous. There are many data centers around the world already, with each data center having a lot of servers. Plus, there is a network of CDNs, so content delivery networks, that make your applications or your files even faster by placing them close to the user. It's all based on internet standards, and we'll see that later on. And what does it actually provide us? It provides us scalability. Like I already mentioned, if I need more resources for my application, I just take them from the cloud, and when I don't need them anymore, I just release them back to the cloud. It offers me a lot, an enormous amount of computing power. As much as I need, it offers me as much storage as I need. The good thing about the Windows Azure Cloud is that we can develop using the tools we all know. Everybody knows Visual Studio, and the good thing is that the Windows Azure development can be done using Visual Studio. I'm coming back to the tools later on. Now, as I mentioned, it's a cloud operating system. However, it is more than what you think of when you hear the term operating system. It's much more, in fact. So Windows Azure is actually a few things. I'm going to highlight a few here. There's actually much more. I cannot explain the entire Windows Azure platform, of course, in 10 minutes or so. But basically, these are the three big blocks of Windows Azure. The computing part is the ability for us to run code in the cloud. That's managing or hosting applications inside of the cloud. So instead of placing them at a host, you will be placing your applications inside of in the cloud, and they will run from there. So there's actually code being executed on the cloud. The second part is scalable storage. There is no limit in the amount of storage that you have with the cloud. You can just upload files there, they will be available, and so it's a real scalable storage for files, video files, picture files, and so on and so forth. And there's also something called a virtual network. The virtual network allows you to connect servers that are in the cloud with servers you have on premise. There are a lot of options there. We're not going to talk about that anymore because there's no real specific application for that in Silverlight. Now, Microsoft is actually really doing a lot of work in the cloud. There is actually, Microsoft with Azure is focusing on what we call the PaaS part of implementation, and that's Platform as a Service. Now, Platform as a Service basically says there is hardware available, there is software already available, and you can build your applications on top of that platform. So the only thing that we have to do if we use the Windows Azure Cloud is actually building our applications and hosting them on the Windows Azure Cloud. If you go lower in the abstraction, because you see at the bottom there, you see the abstraction arrow going from left to right. If you go lower in the abstraction, then there is infrastructure as a service. Infrastructure as a service is, for example, like Amazon does. They host servers for you. They actually make servers available for you, but you are responsible for placing software on there. So the operating system, the patching of those operating systems, you have to do that. If you go farther to the right, there is something called software as a service. And software as a service is basically software that is hosted in the cloud. For example, Office 365 is an application that falls under the software as a service implementation. And this slide actually says more or less the same. If you have to do it all yourself, at the far left, you see that you have to buy servers, connect them to the network, install operating systems, install patches on there, and then start with your own applications and your own data. If you go to the infrastructure part, the vendor is going to be responsible for the network and the service, and you are responsible for the software, operating system, all the way up to your own applications and data. Azure is focusing on the third pillar there. It says much more is done by the vendor, so the operating system, the runtimes is already, the runtimes are already there, so the .NET runtime, for example, is already there, and you can focus on just what you need to build, your applications and your data. And software as a service, there's actually nothing that you have to do yourself. It's just an application that you use that's hosted in the cloud. Okay. So the parts of Windows Azure are the following. So the compute part is actually called the hosted services. And hosted services, basically, as the word says it, are a way to host your application, or your applications or your services. There's actually two ways of doing something in hosted services. That's using a web role or a worker role. A web role, as the word says it, it's something that hosts your internet applications, your ASP.NET applications, and we will use that extensively throughout the talk. A role, by the way, is an instance that executes work. So an instance that executes a web work, or an instance that does something else, and that's a worker role. A worker role can basically be used for running any executable in the cloud. That way, it is also possible to, for example, inside of the Windows Azure Cloud, use another runtime than .NET or another database. The second part of Windows Azure, and that's also an important part that we're going to be taking a look further to, is Azure Storage. Azure Storage is a scalable storage. There is basically no limit with Azure Storage. Each Azure Storage, one Azure account has 5 storage accounts, and each storage account has 100 terabytes of storage possible. And if you need even more, you can do that if you need to. And you can create more accounts if you really have to. So it's a massive amount of volume that it can host, and it's also capable of serving those files very fast. And we will be looking at Azure Storage later on as well. Now, Azure Storage is actually made up out of 3 parts. There is blob storage, and that's the one that I'll be taking a look at to further. Blob storage is basically file. Videos, pictures, and stuff like that. And also the ZAP file will be hosting that in blob storage. Table storage is a non-relational way of storing data. I won't be looking at table storage either, and I won't be looking at queue storage either. Queue storage is to, for example, exchange messages between a web role and a worker role. The third part of Windows Azure is SQL Azure. SQL Azure is a database in the cloud, delivered as a service. So it's also more than what you would expect from a normal database. It's actually delivered to you as a service, giving Microsoft the ability to guarantee high availability and stuff like that. There's not everything that you expect in SQL Server is there yet. What there is today is a database, of course. There is reporting and data sync, and we'll be taking a look at those as well. And the final part is App Fabric. And App Fabric is like services you can use inside of your application, cloud services you can use in your application. I won't be looking at these ones. If you want more information, just browse on the internet, and there's a lot of information to find on these as well. All right. Why do you, as a Silverlight developer, need to care about the Azure cloud? That's a good question. Well, the cloud is, of course, targeting web apps. A Silverlight application, although it runs on the client, of course, is still a web application. It uses services quite a lot. It uses databases quite a lot. So we benefit from the fact that Windows Azure guarantees a high availability. Our services are scalable. Our database is really scalable. And those things are real benefits for our applications as well. All right. If you want to start with Windows Azure development, you need, of course, Visual Studio. I think that's quite logical. And then you need the Azure tools. And there's actually a VS Cloud Service.exe that you download, and that installs both the SDK and the tools. And the tools include, and we'll see that one as well, an emulator. An emulator that creates like a local cloud on your machine that you can test your applications on, both for compute, so for hosted services, and for storage. And if you want to do real development and real deployment, actually, you need an account on Windows Azure, and you need a credit card for that as well. And when you have that, you get access to the management portal, and we'll be taking a look at the management portal, of course, throughout this talk as well. All right. So with that, I hope I've given you a brief overview of the Windows Azure implementation and the Windows Azure Cloud. And now we'll be taking a look at Silverlight applications in combination with that cloud. All right. So the part is actually titled Moving Silverlight Applications to the Cloud. And I actually got the inspiration because I did this at a few customers where we did migrations of applications, including Silverlight applications, to the cloud. Now, one thing that I noticed is that many people think that moving to the cloud, moving to Windows Azure, is an all-in approach. And what I mean by that is that they think that when they move to the cloud, they have to move everything to the cloud. They think it's not possible to move just the database or just the services. It is possible, and it's a scenario that you often see. If you have your application hosted on a Silverlight application hosted on a local server, but your database server, you don't want to renew that server, for example, why not moving to the cloud? And still hold your Silverlight application and your hosting website on your own server and let it communicate with a server in the cloud, a database server, for example, SQL Azure. Or if you have services, you want to profit from the scalability and the high availability of Windows Azure, why not move your services to the cloud? You can do that. There's no limit on the ways that you divide your application in what you move to the cloud and what you don't move to the cloud. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to show you the different levels in moving stuff to the cloud. So I'm going to start with the database only. It's a really simple implementation. I'm sorry. Just moving the database and the Silverlight application and the hosting website and the services still on my own server. Then we'll move the services as well. The third part will be moving the hosting site as well. So we'll include first the ZAP inside of the web role, and when we look at blob storage, we'll move the ZAP to blob storage. And finally, we'll be taking a look at moving a RIA Services application, because there are some particularities there that we'll be taking a look as well. All right. So this is a scenario in a small overview. So you have the database on the far right, you have your service layer, and your hosting website with a Silverlight application, a typical Silverlight business application. And so what we'll do first is move only the database. So we'll get something like the red part is moved to, we want to move to the cloud, and the blue part is still on our own service. Both perhaps two servers, perhaps two web servers, one that hosts the website with the Silverlight application, one that hosts the services for the WCF services or the REST services. So the scenario is a simple business application, a Silverlight business application. We have a WCF service that exposes data from a database using an entity framework model, and the data we have upfront, we have it in a SQL Server 2008 database. We want to move that to the cloud, that database, just the database. The steps that we'll need to do are the following. We start by creating a new database in SQL Azure. Next will be, of course, we have the database already on our own database server. We want to move that database to Windows Azure. So we will be using something called a SQL Migration Wizard. That's a tool that you can download for free from Codeplex. And then we just need to change the connection string in our configuration of our services that are still on our servers, and we will be up and running again. Let's take a look at this in a first demo. All right, so as we follow the steps, let me quickly take the steps again. The first step is creating a database on SQL Azure. So let's take a look at SQL Azure. I hope you can see my browser open now. So this is the Windows Azure Portal. And the Windows Azure Portal is like your portal to all Azure services. If you can see my mouse moving over here, you see that on the left bottom we have the hosted services and we have database. Hosted services, we'll be taking a look at that in just a second. So this is now the database part, and in the database part I have my account and I have my database server. This database server is now currently hosting one database called City Hotels. If I want to create a new database, I just do it using this web interface. So I can create a new database. I can select the type of database, and depending on the type, you can either select, if you select web, you have 1 or 5 GB of size, and if you select business, you can go up to 50 GB. Of course, depending on the type that you select, it's going to cost you more or less. I think that's quite logical. In this case, for my database, I just selected a web database of 1 GB. I can change this afterwards if I want to, of course. The current limit is at 50 GB, which is quite a lot for a database. So if you need more, you will need to divide it in more than one database. This is now just a database hosted in SQL Azure. What I can do is I can click here on Manage, and it is going to open me let's say a SQL Management Studio in browser. It's a Silverlight application, as you can see, and it gives me access to my database to manage it from a Silverlight application. There we go. So my database has 2 tables, the city table and the hotel table. And in that city table, I can browse the data, or I can take a look at the design of the table. The good thing, of course, is that let me close this one down. I can leave this page. I can also connect to this database from SQL Management Studio if I want to. Here I have the fully qualified DNS name, and that fully qualified DNS name I can use that to connect from SQL Management Studio. So if I open SQL Management Studio here, I can connect to a database, and that's the one that you saw, the connection string that you just saw in the Windows Azure Portal, my username, password. And then I have my database here as well, so I can manage it exactly like I'm used to. There's no different way of working with the database hosted in the cloud. There are a few things that are not the same. I think, oops, that's not good. Why is it not connecting? Let's try that again. Might have timed out or something. All right, let's do a refresh here. All right, there we are. So this is the city table and the hotel table. There is no way to right-click on this and say view the data. So I need to write a new query. So I think you can write a query to get all the data. Select star from city. Execute this query, and I get the data of my table. All right. So you see that there is really no difference in working with the database that's hosted in Azure than there is with the database that you host on your own server. You can start thinking about connection strings already. I'm going to first show you the way that you now move that database from the local server to the cloud. There is something called the SQL Migration Wizard. And a SQL Azure migration wizard, I should say, is a project on Codeplex that you can download for free, of course. And it is actually a migration tool to move a database locally to the cloud. I've already downloaded it up front. And this is the I think I have it open already. So, okay. This is the migration wizard that you see here now. That migration wizard allows me to do migrations. It also, it doesn't just do a migration, it also is possible to do a check of your database to see if everything is okay. There are some things that don't work in Azure, and this tool will capture them for you. So, I can, for example, do an analysis first and then a migration. So, I select that, and then I'm going to type in the name of my local database. So I'm going to move the city hotels database, connecting. I select the city hotels database, and I just use the default here. Now it's going to generate scripts and BCP blocks to move them to the cloud. So it's ready. It has generated that for me. There's nothing in red here, so I don't have any exceptions. And now I just go back to my management portal. I select the DNS name and I type it in here. I enter my username and my password. All right, connecting. And I see the database that I have already created. So if I now click next, it's going to copy the data. Both the schema and the data will be copied to the cloud server. And now for the application, what does this result in? Well, let's take a look at the application. The application itself is really simple. It's a city hotel browser. Okay, so it is the only thing. Let me first run the application. Let me first run it, and then I'll explain. Let's take a look. So as you can see here at the top, it is running on my local machine, and it should be getting in data. And this data is now coming from the cloud. This data, this list of cities, is loaded from the cloud. I can click on one of the cities, and it will get me in some hotels. All right. So this application is now still running on my local machine. It could be on your local server, doesn't matter. You get the ID. The data is hosted in the cloud. I'll close this one down. The application structure, I hope you can see it here on the right in Solution Explorer in Visual Studio. There's nothing different. The only thing that I changed was the connection string in the web config of my web project. My web project is actually is made up out of an EDMX, an entity model that is one-on-one copy of my database model. There's nothing particular going on here. My Visual Studio is loading the toolbox. Just hold on for 1 minute. Hope it doesn't take too long. Come on, please. Yeah, there we go. Then I have a regular WCF service. It's actually a Silverlight enabled WCF service that reads out the cities and reads out the hotels. Nothing special going on here. And for the database, it connects, it reads out the connection string, city hotel entities hosted inside of, or placed inside of the connection strings block inside of my web config. And the only thing that I need to do is change the connection string to the server in the cloud. I'm not going to scroll any further to the right because then you will see my login. So I'm not going to do that with a live demonstration. It might be too funny to delete the database or something. All right, so the only thing that I just did was changing the connection string after I migrated my database to the cloud. All right, I hope everything is still okay. All right, there are no questions yet, so I hope you all hear me quite well because there's no mentioning about bad sound this time. All right, so let me close this one down, and I will need this one later on, so I'm going to keep that up and running. Let me go back to my slides here. So we did this demo already. So, oops. The next step that I want to do is moving my WCF service. Now I'm ready with my database in the service. Now let's move that WCF service layer as well. We can do that, of course. So still the same scenario, a business application that communicates with the WCF service. The data is already in SQL Azure. Now I would like to move my WCF service to Windows Azure. A bit of side information, of course. You all know probably that Silverlight can perfectly communicate with services in regular web services, ASMX web services, or WCF services, but we have to use the basic HTTP binding. Both are exposing a WSDL file, a web service description language file, that can be used inside of Visual Studio to generate a proxy to which you can communicate. Silverlight's Visual Studio actually generates in the Silverlight project a client config file, service references.client config file, that contains a reference to the address of the service. What we now can do is move the existing service and use it inside of Visual Studio to generate the proxy, or we can just move the service and change that configuration file. I'm going to show that in just a second. Now, of course, this actually requires us to do a bit more than just changing the connection string. What we are going to do next is creating inside of our solution a so-called cloud project. And a cloud project is the template that we use to create role projects in that can be used to, for example, host the site that hosts the services. We can then test that role inside of the compute emulator. We then update the Silverlight project to reference the project in the test cloud. We then deploy our services to the cloud, and then we have to update the Silverlight application and redeploy that as well. Quite a lot of steps, but you'll see that it's actually quite simple to do. Let me show you in a demo. The first thing that I actually am going to show you is, let's go back to the management portal here. And I just entered the database tab, let's say. Now let's take a look at the hosted services part. The hosted services is the home to create new storage accounts and hosted services. And the hosted service is what I will be needing. I will actually be needing some place to create a new service, and a service is like a place where my application can run. So I'll actually create a new application that runs in the cloud. So what I can do is, this is my account. I can create a new hosted service, and I can create a new name for that. There we go. This is the URL that you can access it with. And I'm going to leave it like this. I'm coming back to that in just a second. I'm going to first show you now what I need to do on the client. So if I click OK here, after I've uploaded my code, it will actually create a virtual machine in the cloud with my code on there, and it will run inside of the Azure cloud. All right. Let's first make the step to take a look. I'm going to close the other one down. Let's first take a look at the service and the application again. All right. So let's first take a look at the solution. Don't look at this cloud project yet. What I did is I made a separate project for the services, to just move the services. So the City Hotel Browser Web doesn't contain the services anymore. The services, it's actually one service, including the web config and the data model, the entity model, I'm sorry, are now in a separate site. Nothing special there. What I now have to do is, what I want to do is I want to move that site that hosts the services to Windows Azure. So what I'm going to do is, in my solution, I am going to add a new project, and I'm going to select Cloud here. So I'm going to add a new Azure project, hit OK, and it's going to ask me what type of roles I already want to include. I don't need any roles yet because I have my site already So what I'm going to do is, what it just did, it created a cloud project inside of the solution. And in here, I can now say, add me a RepRo project in solution. I have two, but I'm just going to move the service hosting side to Windows Azure. So what it's now going to, what I now just did, is I created a new RepRo actually. So an instance in my virtual machine that will host me my site, and my site contains my services. I can take a look at the configuration. If you take a look here, you see that I have just one instance running my service. You can type 2 here if you want, and you can also select the type. I'm not going to go in there. Of course, again, depending on what you select here, it's going to cost you more or less. All right. Now what I have to do is I want to deploy this to the cloud. I'm going to remove this one again because I already did some prep work, and I have the same here already available in the in this City Hotel Browser Cloud project. So let's now create multiple startup projects. I'm going to start the cloud project and the hosting site. All right, and let's run it and take a look at what happens now. It's building, and you see here at the bottom that it's not there yet. There it is. There is something called the compute emulator. I hope you can read it. The compute emulator has already started. Let's take a look at it. All right. So this is now my mini cloud, let's say, my own personal cloud on my machine to be able to test stuff against. This is normal, don't panic. So these are two instances of my my application, because I entered 2 there in there as well, that will now be hosting my service hosting website. And they are hosting it on a site on this one, 127.0.0.1 port 81. And if I just type city hotel service.svc, it will show me a service. And that service is now a service on my local cloud, and we're going to move that in just a second. So what I need to do for my Silverlight application, my Silverlight application is at this point here, and it just works. Here it's hitting a breakpoint, sorry for that. It is still hosted on my server, but it is now connecting to a service in the cloud. And to prove that I'm not lying, it is connecting to, as you can see here, the endpoint in my service references client config is 127.0.0.181, the exact same address that I typed in the address bar of my browser.
Gill,
yes.
Excuse me. Could you increase the font size or zoom
of course,
the source
sorry.
code?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, we'll take a look. We'll just change it. Sorry for that, folks. Let's increase it to 14. It should be enough. All right. So just to prove again that I'm not lying, we are now connecting in the service references client config to 127.0.0.1, and that's the service hosted on my local cloud. Now, what do I need to do if I move this to a real Azure or to the real Azure cloud? What I'm going to do then, let me start this, is I am going to right-click here and select Publish. And I can deploy it from here, but I'm going to say just package it for me. I will do the rest. And it is going to create me a package and a configuration file that you see here. I hope you can see them because I cannot zoom in there. You see, you have a package that contains my service hosting site and a configuration file. And we're just going to take that and we're going to move that to the hosted service. So I'm going to browse here, oops, and select the package and select the configuration file here as well. And when I hit OK, it will start me a service it will start creating a virtual machine with my service on there already. I'm not going to do that because it takes about 20, 25, 30 minutes to do that, and we won't make that in time, but this is how we would do it. And then the final thing we need to do is, after it has been created, change this 127.0.0.1 into the real address of the service. All right? So let's move on. In case you would be using a REST service, same type of application, but instead of using ASMX or WCF, use a REST service. It can be a WCF service that is communicating over REST. Can we move that to SQL Azure as well? And the answer is, of course, yes. I hope you all know what REST is. There is a slide of side information here. It's a protocol that is based on web standards. It uses the standard HTTP verbs like get and put, where basically what you do is you send a request to a URL, you get in some XML, and you just parse that. It could be JSON as well. And many Web 2.0 applications like Facebook and Flickr and Twitter, they all use this for their API. And if you want to use REST as well, you can do so using WCF. You can create a WCF service that communicates over REST. So if you want to do REST with Windows Azure, there's really no change at all. If you take a look at these steps for REST service and a regular WCF service, there's like no change at all. Because of time constraints, I'm going to skip this demo. It is included in the download that you can take a look at afterwards. There is really no change at all. Of course, the WCF service is different, but for the rest, it's exactly the same. A more important question is, what if we want to move the entire Silverlight application to the cloud? So if we take a look at the schema again, so we have the database already in the cloud, we have the service already in the cloud. Now we want to move the hosting site, including the Silverlight application, to the cloud. Can we do that? So that is the case. The database is already there. We have a WCF service in a web role, and now we want to move the Silverlight application as well. Can we do that? Of course we can do that. The Silverlight application needs to be hosted on some page. It can be an HTML page, it can be an ASP.NET page, it can even be a PHP or GSP page. Doesn't matter. Of course, for Windows Azure, it's going to be the easiest, and it's an ASP.NET page. The Silverlight application for the rest is just a ZAP file. There's really nothing different there. The ZAP file, we can include that in the hosted service. The hosted service is like a copy of the entire web application, and if you have a client bin with a ZAP file there, it's going to be packaged in the Azure package, and you can upload it together with your hosting site. So we can include the ZAP file in the hosted service. We can also include the ZAP file or place the ZAP file in Azure storage, and I'm going to come back to that later on. So what we need to do this is either create a second web role in the same cloud project, or preferably create a new cloud project in which we would then have a new virtual machine for just the hosting side, a separate separate virtual machine with the services and a database. Depending on which solution you actually take, it will create two virtual machines, costing you more, of course, or creating two sites in the same virtual machine, but they are only accessible via different port numbers. All right. If you move the Silverlight application to the cloud, what do we need to do? Let's take a look. So I'm going to close this one down and take this one. So it is this solution here. Oops, this is not okay. Why is it doing that? Let's try something different here. Oh, it's there, I think. Okay, it's coming. Okay, there it is. So now we have, if you take a look at the cloud project here, if you take a look at the cloud project, I now have two roles in here, two web roles. One is hosting my hosting website, my Silverlight hosting website, and another one is hosting the services still. If I now run this, let me close the other Visual Studio down. If I now run this, it will again start my local cloud, my emulator, and it will now run my Silverlight application from the cloud and as well the hosting site. So it's now deploying. Just takes a few seconds to deploy it to the cloud. So there we have the City Hotel, City Hotel Browser test page. So that is the hosting site is now hosted on 127.0.0.1 port 8080, and the service is still running on 127.0.0.1.81. If you take a look at the emulator again, you'll see that it has, it's still open here, it has two instances, actually two instances, this one and this one, but they are in the same project. So these are actually two applications running on the same IIS, let's say, because it's just an IIS that runs in the cloud. These two applications are referring to one another. If you take a look at the configuration of the Silverlight application, it is again referring to 127.0.0.1.81. And the service hosting site, whoops, not this one, the home page, is now also hosted inside of Azure. Again, you can do it differently. You can create two cloud projects, and then you don't have the issue with the port numbers. It depends on what you really need. All right. When deploying, it's of course exactly the same, so I'm not going to spend any time there. All right. What now happens if we want to use RIA services? A RIA services application is a Silverlight application that uses RIA services. I think you all know that RIA services and a Silverlight project that uses it have like a bond between them. There's a tight link between these two projects. Can we move this type of project to the cloud as well? So the case is a Silverlight application using RIA services. On the server side, we have RIA services using or consuming an entity framework model. The database is already in SQL Azure. We want, again, to do an all-in approach, move everything to the cloud. I've already explained this. I'm going to skip this one. What are the steps that we need to do now? Again, like normal, create a rep role for the cloud project. The service hosting site needs to be placed inside of that rep role, but we need to make some changes there. Because the virtual machine that is created inside of Azure does not have RIA services installed, it doesn't know the RIA services assemblies. They are not placed inside of a GAC. So what we need to do is we need to set the copy local to true for those RIA services assemblies, and then it will package these assemblies inside of the package that we can then move to the cloud. And the ZAP file can then, along with the other files, be included in that same project. Let's take a look. I have here a RIA services project. It's the same type, same application. There's really nothing different going on here. So I'm not going to spend any time on looking at the application, but I'm going to spend some time on taking a look at the structure of the application. Come on. All right. So we have here, it's hanging, just a few seconds. There's I have a conflicting installer on my machine, so on my Visual Studio. So this is my website here, and it has a RIA service here, as you see here, that uses the entity framework model that is in here as well, in here. And so my Silverlight application now has a RIA services link to my web project, and it generates client-side code. If I want to place this inside of Azure, what I need to do is create another web role. But in my website that hosts the RIA services, there are some references being added. me make this a bit wider. These three references are added. These three references need to have their copy local set to true. Otherwise, when we deploy to the real Azure cloud, it will not know them. It doesn't know RIA services. There's no RIA services installed out of the box. And to show you that this is really included, let me publish this. This one, publish. This will now, again, create a service package, including the website, where we also have the copy local set to true of those RIA services assemblies. And if you take a look at the file size here, it's now almost 9 megabytes because of the fact that I have included these assemblies. And I can now upload that. And this will now just work in the cloud as well because I have included these assemblies locally. All right. Let me close this one down. Moving on. What if we, and that's like a small application of what we've seen. What if we, in a Silverlight application, want to use Twitter? I assume you are all familiar with the fact that Silverlight applications, if you use an external service, perform a check to see if there is a client or policy file there, a client access policy or cross domain. Now, Twitter does not have that type of file deployed, meaning that from a Silverlight application, I cannot make a direct connection to Twitter unless it's running out of browser with elevated permissions. Now, an in-browser application therefore needs a service layer. So my Silverlight application can connect with that service layer, and that service can connect to Twitter. If your application, however, becomes quite popular, that service layer is going to get hammered quite a lot, because all Silverlight clients will be connecting to that local service, that service that needs to be there, that service intermediate layer that goes to Twitter. But all your clients are going to connect to that single service. So it would be a good idea to move that service to to Azure. So an in-browser Silverlight application that uses Twitter, we want to connect to Twitter. We cannot do that directly. So instead of creating and hosting that service ourselves, we are going to use Windows Azure for this. I'm going to skip this. I've already explained that. And let me show you how I've done this. It's going to be very quickly. So this is my very basic Silverlight Twitter application. Let me show you what it looks like. I'm very proud of the design that I did. So it is connecting to Twitter as we speak. It is taking a look at the public timeline, or it should be taking a look at the public timeline. And something goes wrong here. Oops. Seems that my cloud is not running. Okay, so something seems wrong here. Might be that there are two applications running at the same time, so I'm not going to spend any time there, and that is connected to another port. I'm sorry for that. I'm going to skip showing it. I'm going to show you the code. That's more important. So the structure of the project is, I have a Silverlight application, this one, that connects not directly to Twitter, but instead connects to a proxy, a Twitter service client. That Twitter service client is a service that I've written, and that service instead goes out to Twitter. I cannot write this code in my Silverlight application because it will not work. Silverlight will check for the client access policy file to be there, and it's not there on Twitter. So instead, I have to use this intermediate service layer. This service hosting site, I would need to host myself as well. It's going to get quite hammered if I get a lot of visitors on my Silverlight application. So instead, I move this service layer to Windows Azure, and you can run it from there. For the rest, there's nothing really different going on. My Silverlight application will be connecting to the same port, same address, 127.001 port 81. It sometimes happens if you have two projects at the same time that port 81 is taken, and that's probably what's happening now, and that's why it's causing an exception here. But again, the code is included, so if you run them separately, it will work fine. All right. So we have about 5 minutes to go, and I don't have that much to say anymore. So let's take a look at blob storage. The second part of Windows Azure that makes it possible to store files. Azure Storage is files or store in the cloud. You have table storage, queue storage, and blob storage. And in these slides, I want to show you how we can take advantage of blob storage inside of a Silverlight application. So blob storage is basically file hosting. It can be used to store images, store videos, even if your Silverlight application is not running inside of the cloud. So assume that you have a Silverlight application that you host on on a host, discount ASP or whatever is ISP, and you don't want to pay for disks at your host, and you still have a lot of videos. You can move those videos to a blob storage. And from Silverlight, you can access those files perfectly. Now, blob storage can either make a file public, or it can make a file with private access. Now, I don't have a demo of the latter one. Now, the latter one actually refers to a non-public addressable file. And that is important as well. So normally a file just gets a URL in blob storage as well. If you don't want people to just access that URL, for example, it's a paid video site, and you don't want people to just use the URL from blob storage, what you can build then is a service that uses shared access signatures. And shared access signatures are a way to create time-limited links. You can create a service that generates links for you. It generates a public key, and that will be appended to a link, and your Silverlight application can then access that link, including the public part of the key, for a limited time. That key is generated every 10 minutes or so again. So even if you have private files, let's say, it can be still in blob storage. And Silverlight can use both public and private files inside of blob storage. Now, the other thing that we can do is use the blob storage to place the zap file in. We can place the zap file inside of blob storage. And why would we actually want to do that? We just moved it to Windows Azure Cloud. The problem there is that it is not possible out of the box to just upgrade the zap file. You have to bring down or upload again your entire service package. You cannot just update one zap file. Therefore, it might be easier to upload the zap to blob storage and use it from there and let it access from there. It's easier to do versioning as well. There are a few things that you have to watch out for, and I'm just going to show you them in the demo. Let's take a look. And this will be the last demo, I think, because of time constraints. So let's take a look at the demo of blob storage and then the zap in blob storage as well. So let me run the application, and let me open a few applications as well that we can use. So blob storage is like a, oops, something wrong here. No. Blob storage is like a directory, a drive in the cloud. And you can upload and download files from there as well. And these are two applications, CloudBerry Explorer and Cloud Explorer, that you can use to manage those files. You can compare it to an FTP. So this is my storage account here, called Gill Cleeren, and it has a few directories, zap and test. Inside of test, I shouldn't say directories, these are actually containers, but a directory can be compared to a container. So these are files, a video file and an image file and an XML file that I've just placed inside of blob storage. And I can right click on these and take a look at the properties. And as you see, there is a direct link, a URL that I can use in my Silverlight applications. Why not? It's just a file. So the same for the image, of course. It also has a public addressable URL. So if I click on this link that is going to download my file from blob storage, or alternatively download the video, it's going to work fine. It's now downloading that file from blob storage. In my code, let's take a look to the XAML. So simple image. As you can see there, it is the image is referred from that same link in blob storage, and the same goes for that video. There it is. The source is referring to that WMV inside of blob storage. Now, one specific thing here is assume that I want to read out an XML file. I've also in my container test here an XML file that contains trending topics of Twitter, just a random XML file. Now, what I would like to do is read out this XML file inside of my Silverlight application, and I think you all know what this is going to give. It is going to check for a client access policy file. Let's open Fiddler. So if I now run this, let's take a look what will happen. Let's take a look what my application will do. I'm going to read out an XML from blob storage. So it's trending topics. There we go. So what did it actually do? It read out the client access policy on gillcleeren.blob.core.windows.net. And then that file is there. It is allowing me to connect to my XML file and read that file out. Now the problem is that you cannot place a file, even if it's just a client access policy file, on the root of your cloud, your blob storage. There is, however, a small trick to do that, and that's creating a directory called $root. And inside of that $root, that's like a shortcut back to the root, I can place files inside of that container. And so if I place inside of my client, inside of my $root container, the client access policy file, I can still run, or I can still access files that are stored in my blob storage and read them out via Silverlight. And Silverlight will actually make that that normal request to the root/client access policy, and this $root container will refer back to that root. All right, and to finish off, let me just show you using a ZAP inside of Windows of blob storage, and that's the last time I'm going to do. So this is a Silverlight application that refers to a ZAP file that I've hosted inside of Windows Azure blob storage. My Silverlight application, this ZAP file, I can actually delete it. I'm not using it. My cloud application, my cloud project, hosts the web, has a web role that hosts this site. However, this ZAP file is not included. It's just referring to a file inside of my Azure store, blob store. You can see that file over here in the ZAP container. Oops. I have the file called remote-zap.zap. If I run this, it's going to start up my my cloud project. If it works with the Portal, it shouldn't be a problem. This one. Come on. Okay, there we go. So we're running 127.0.0.1.81 and a fiery red Silverlight application that is downloaded. Let me close this down. That is downloaded from gillcleeren.blob.core.windows.net. One thing, there's actually two things that you have to look out for. Let me use this one now. The file, it's I can show it here. I can show it here as well. The file should have a content type set to application/x-silverlight-app. That's one thing that you have to look out for. If you don't do that, it will not work. The second thing that you have to watch out for is the fact that the Silverlight application is now hosted on a different location. And if you have services inside of this website, those services are cross-domain automatically as well. They are not in the same domain as the ZAP file, and that's what Silverlight actually checks for. That means that if you access services on your normal domain, you have to include a cross-domain file as well, because these files are in a cross-domain access as well. All right. So we don't have time for the Windows Phone part. It's a pity, but yeah, you can take a look at the demos as well. They are included as well. So with that, I want to finish off, and I hope I've shown you a few ways that Silverlight applications can work in harmony with Windows Azure. You can move the database, you can move services, and you can move the Silverlight application and go all in for Windows Azure. Blob storage is useful as well. You can use it for resources, and you can use it to host the ZAP file. And so with that, I want to leave you, and let's now take time for some questions and hopefully some answers as well. Emil, do we have some questions?
Yeah, there are a couple of questions. Do you want to read in the panel, or should
yeah,
I read
I'm going to open them. I'm going to open them. Just a second. All right. There are quite a lot of questions actually. Let me take a look at. All right. So I may not be able to answer all your SQL Azure questions and your your Azure questions. I'm not an expert on Azure yet. Sorry for that. So the first question comes from Drazen Vukovic, and he asks, what about backup and restore in SQL Azure? As far as I know, that is not supported yet. I may be cursing here, so I'm not really an expert on that entirely, so I don't think that actually works yet. Let me take a look at, yeah, these are very specific SQL Azure questions. I may not be able to answer those questions. I'm going to take, okay. So the next question I would like to take is the question of Brian Paul. He says, this all looks great, thanks for that. How do you determine pricing costs prior to deploying applications? Well, that is a very good question. So Brian actually asks, how can we take or get an estimate on the cost first before we move to the cloud? Well, the thing is, that's one thing that many people are afraid of. They think that Azure doesn't really, or the pricing model is not really transparent. And however, that is a misunderstanding. What Azure allows you to do is really pay for what you use. With other models, shared hosting or a server that you buy at your local hoster, it will often be too much. You for example pay for a database that may at some point become 20 gigabytes, and you start paying immediately for those 20 gigabytes. However, you perhaps in the first year only use 5 gigabytes. With Windows Azure, you can really tweak that and just pay for what you really need instead of what you might need at some point. And there is the second part of the question: are there tools available to do this cost analysis? Well, yeah, there are a few. There are actually quite a few calculators available. Just Bing for Azure calculator of cost calculation. There are many available that take into account all the different pricings for the database, for the blob storage, and for compute storage, and also for things like access control. You also need to do specific, that also costs a specific amount, but they all take that into account. And you can, of course, you cannot do a real, yeah, you can do an estimate. It's going to be an approach because you don't know how much usage you're actually going to have. But we've done it at customers as well, and we actually come very close to what the customer is actually going to end up paying. Do keep in mind that everything has its cost. So if you just use the database, there is a cost for hosting the database, and there's a cost for the traffic. And but for blob storage, for example, there's a cost for how many files you store, the files that you store, and the files that you access. So everything has its cost, and many things actually end up being a lot cheaper in Windows Azure than they are with a pre-bought hosting package, because you can actually tweak more what you need. Let me take a look. I cannot understand. Don't on. Oh, wait, let me take a look. Another question from Sean here, or Sheen, asks if you need to support both cloud hosting and standard server hosting for the same application. Is there a way to do it with one set of source code by configuration? I assume yes. I assume that works fine. Yeah. One other question here that just came in from Svetan Paskov. Do you think the future of Silverlight is, I assume, with Azure and Windows Phone? Is that what you mean? I hope so. So his question is, do I see this as being the future for Silverlight applications, for Windows Phone applications? Yes, I think that for many types of applications, moving part of it to Azure or perhaps everything, is a good way of doing it. And also for Windows Phone, sadly we didn't have time to take a look at the Windows Phone part. Works great with Azure as well. So you can, it's quite logical that Windows Phone also works fine, because it's basically Silverlight code that access services. It doesn't work, for example, with the RIA services, but things like WCF data services and regular WCF services, they all work fine. So even if they are hosted in Windows Azure, that works fine as well. So if that's really what your question is, I think that is going to be the way that will be moving forward, taking Azure into our regular way of working. That's what I think. The other questions that are still open are quite specific for Azure, and most of those are I need to look up, because I'm not really an expert on Azure. I'm more taking a look at how we can use it from Silverlight. So I'll be taking those questions offline, if that's okay.
Okay.
All right. And we will post the answers to online as well, I think. So we'll post them online.
Yeah, so Gill will take all the questions offline, and then we will post the answers to those questions on Silverlight show.
Yeah.
Okay, Gill, okay. So thanks.
Thanks for having me. I hope you all enjoyed it and that you learned something from this talk.
Yeah. Within 2 days, all the demos and slides and the recording will be available on Silverlight show, as well as the answers to your questions. I believe you will be notified by email when the resources are available. So stay tuned, and we'll see you at the next webinar. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.